Hello and welcome to the International Schools Podcast. My name is Dan Taylor.
My name is John Micton. Join us twice a month at the International Schools Podcast as we have conversations with international school leaders, educators, and entrepreneurs working and engaging in the world of international schools and education.
And finally, just to say a huge thank you to our sponsor, ASA for Education, for making this podcast happen. Now on to the episode.
Welcome to the International Schools Podcast. I'm John Micton with host Dan Taylor. Hi, Dan.
Yeah. Hi, John. How are you doing? All good in Luxembourg?
All good in Luxembourg. How are things in Prague these days?
It's good. It's a bit cold. I think we've had a brief summer. I think it's almost over. So yeah, it's great. It's great. Great. Looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah. So we have two guests. Viki, who is the head of the International School of Bergen, and Liz, who's the head of the International School of Rheintal. Am I pronouncing that right?
Pretty close. It's good enough.
Okay. And so what we're really excited about, Viki and Liz both are school leaders, school directors, and they transitioned from different countries in the middle of COVID to take on new school leadership roles, and then we're school leaders in another context, and we're going to let them, of course, unpack that and tell us a bit. And then we're just going to kind of find out what are some learnings, what are some things they're going to keep doing, maybe stop doing and start doing based on these experiences, and any maybe wisdoms or tips or strategies for leaders around the world and educators in general with that journey that they went through. So Viki, welcome, and give us a bit of your journey.
Welcome. Hi, I'm Viki Stiebert. As you can probably hear by my accent, I come from New Zealand, and I've worked in a number of international schools in Hamburg, in Vienna. Went back to New Zealand as head of an Anglican school, and then I spent 10 years in Switzerland, in Zurich. From there, I went to Panama, and now I'm in the rainiest city in Europe called Bergen in Norway.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about Panama. We talked before we started recording. I had a really good time there on my honeymoon, and I met a few teachers out there. Like, what's it like? I know it's a place some people are interested to go and work. There's quite a few international schools there. What is it like as obviously it depends on the school very much, but as a place to live, how did you find it?
Well, Panama City is absolutely fascinating in that it's actually got 12 international schools. Yeah. So there are a lot of people who come in from all over the globe, and it's a fascinating place to teach in, but it's also a wonderful place to live. It's a little bit like a tropical paradise, and I had the privilege of living on a little island outside Panama City where you'd see the world's trade go past the Panama Canal. So an absolutely brilliant place, and you couldn't have chosen a better place for your honeymoon, I have to say.
It's great. We wanted to go somewhere nobody else goes. So yeah, it was great. Yeah.
Wonderful. So Viki, while you were in Panama as the director of the school there, of course, COVID hit. And you obviously, as a school director, you were in the front and center of everything. What were some things that quickly you had to do to recalibrate just because there was no playbook for this? And of course, you tapped into your skill set and also your leadership team and your community. What are some things that quickly you had to tap into that maybe you hadn't as a leader before?
Well, fortunately, the directors around the globe are part of a director network called AAIE. So last year in January, schools started being impacted by COVID. So I was part of their weekly meetings, and you'd start hearing schools closing down, going online, and it just kept moving closer and closer to Panama City. So we started revising our digital learning policies. We started upskilling our teachers, but I don't think anybody in Panama actually thought it was going to happen. So having been part of this network, it made me give this a sense of urgency. And I think, with my German heritage, people thought I was being the woman from hell, continually pushing, saying, we need to do this, we need to learn these skills and all of that. And then suddenly it happened. It was in the middle of March, and we had a professional development day. And in Panama, you have to go by everything the Ministry of Education says. So it's not so much the state, it was the Ministry of Education. And we were given 2 hours to actually clear the campus. And yeah, honestly, it was wow. It was incredible. And we were all faced with a problem that most people who were part of the school didn't think was going to happen. So you saw teachers running all over the place, trying to cram resources. Nobody was allowed to travel. So we had to make sure that students had devices. So they suddenly came to the school to pick up devices because, as in many families, there's one or two devices, but not one for every child. So these 2 hours were very, very dramatic, lots of communications going out. And and suddenly it became reality and everybody believed what I had been taught by AAIE over the previous months was going to happen.
Wow.
And that was a very interesting situation.
Thank you for that. Liz is back. So
Yay!
Viki, we're going to loop back to Liz to do her introduction again, and then we'll ask her the same question. And then let's build on some of the things that you said, Viki. Yeah, does that make sense? So Liz, just give us again an introduction. What school are you at currently as a director, and where your little journey or your big journey?
We'll try again. Challenge number 1 is tech and good Wi-Fi. So my name is Liz Free. I'm director of the International School Rheintal in the German-speaking part of Switzerland. And I moved here just over a year ago. And prior to that, I was a director at the British School in the Netherlands. And before that, I was a head teacher in different schools around the world. And also for 5 years, I was head of teacher education at Oxford University Press. That's the condensed version.
Fantastic. Thank you, Liz. So one of the things that Viki has really kindly done is shared kind of her learning when COVID came. So she was in Panama and suddenly this landed on her desk. And what were some things maybe that she automatically had to engage with? And maybe you can talk about your context, because as I remember, you were in the Netherlands, correct?
I was at that time. I was in the Netherlands. I think, like everybody, it was the initial surprise, really, at what the situation was and how quickly we needed to adapt. So I think I just caught the end of it with the move online, the digital requirements, lots of conversations about what is right and what is wrong. What do we feel as a school about face-to-face online teaching? What is our position on that? What's the child protection position on that? And so we found ourselves in a position where we had to make decisions very quickly, and some of those decisions felt quite big. And initially, like many people, we thought it was going to be a short-term occurrence. And as time has gone on, it's rather than being a sprint, it's been more like a marathon. And so I think in those initial days, when I look at some of my own school and also schools around the world, is we've had to evolve our position. And what worked for the sake of a week or two is very different to what it looks like over 2 months, and what that looks like over 6 months and over a year. And at some point, we have to have an understanding of what normality is, the new normality. And we can't be in this kind of reactionary coping mode for forever. And so I think in that initial bit, it was very much all hands on deck and get this going and get our children learning, so we don't get a gap in the learning journey. But of course, the learning journey was different. And like most journeys, we know it's the destination. You may know where you want to end up, but it's the process of being on that adventure together that can be probably richer learning than perhaps the intended learning to start off with. And so I think that's where we find ourselves now, is that we're in a different place. We still got the same or similar destination, but we're thinking very differently about how we get there.
Viki, how do you feel that from your experience, that was also this learning journey has reframed maybe where the destination is?
Absolutely. I would completely agree with that. I think when we started off, it was very much how we're going to make it work and work it very similar to an ordinary school day. And one of our biggest battles really was with our parents. They expected, maths from 8 to 9 o'clock. And then, and they expected, the teacher to be talking to the students. And they had a very far more traditional approach to what I expected. So, and particularly in early childhood, that was most difficult. Parents were going crazy at home, and they would, saying, why do I have to be the teacher? And we really looked at all of our resources, and we had somebody like Fran Prohlman come in and actually talk to our parents about, being kind to themselves and the difference between what it would be like when we're face to face and how parents might deal with these additional stresses at home and to look after themselves. So she was a great resource in those very early days of COVID. Another part that happened was that I think we think in international schools that many people are just like us, and most people are fairly affluent and all of that. But of course, in places like Panama, we had assistant teachers who didn't have Wi-Fi. And, suddenly was, well, they can't be sitting at home doing nothing and drawing a salary. And, what do we do? So the school actually went out and made sure that everybody had Wi-Fi connection at home, including all the assistants teachers. So I think this whole being inclusive wasn't just about the students, but it was about all parts of our community and how do we best deal with that.
That's so interesting because I think there's so many schools around the world where the local staff maybe don't have the incomes of the expatriate staff. So that's a great anecdote. Liz, did you also feel that kind of tension, creative tension with parents? This kind of, because I think what Viki's telling us, there was a perception from parents that maybe didn't align with what good research and good pedagogy might have said.
It's actually very interesting for me because I came from the British school in the Netherlands that did no face-to-face teaching at all during the COVID period, and came to ISR that did a completely online face-to-face learning experience. So I went from kind of one extreme to the other, and like most things in life, it's somewhere in the middle. So my experience initially, and it's interesting because being a director in the school, and I've got 2 children myself, and kind of seeing that play out, is I felt the social interaction initially in those early days when it was all being emailed home and there was work coming left, right, and centre, that it was really quite overwhelming because what we were looking to do initially was to try and replicate, partly because we didn't want to lose pace in the curriculum, partly because of parental expectation as well. And we wanted the best for our students. The perception was that we needed to try and do everything that we would normally do. And Viki, you were just saying this as well. But within the structure where you've got parents working, you might have one device in a room or in a household. We make a lot of assumptions about international families, but often international families on expatriate contracts are not necessarily as affluent as we might think. And so there was huge pressures on families and teachers to make sure that responsibility for the learning and trying to support parents through that journey. So I think that was really tough in the early days. And it is, as a director myself and also with 2 young children, trying to help them with their learning, it was tough. And we got to the point as a family where we just said, actually, you know what, we're going to do what makes sense for our children. And some days it might be this much, other days it might be that much. And it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah. Did either of you have to do any hybrid learning situations where you had some children in class, some joining in from Google Meet or Zoom or anything?
Yeah, we ended up with that in the second iteration. The first iteration was everybody home. The second iteration was half. I actually had one point where it was half the school one day, half the school the next day, and then we also had students that were not coming to school because they were in quarantine or the parents were not comfortable. So we had this A, B, and C group happening across the organisation. It was extremely complex and challenging, and it was not easy on anyone, really. And thankfully, where I am now, this is not an issue. Fingers crossed.
And I take it, Liz, that was because of the edicts of the local government and what the local health laws were saying.
That's right. It was to do with social distancing and needing to maintain a minimal number of people on the campus. Here at ISR in Switzerland, we're in kind of like bubbles. So where we've had an outbreak, we isolate that group. They go to remote learning, and then the rest of the school carries on. And in that case, we're a smaller environment where we can be more agile. And again, we've moved to a hybrid model, sort of asynchronized, and we have an in-between structure between having face-to-face contact and the importance of social interaction, while still understanding that learning can look differently when you're completely remotely based. So we have that happening. We haven't had it so far this year. We've been back, I think, 3 weeks now, but we did have that throughout last year.
Wow. And Viki, you in Panama, as I remember, you were always online. You didn't have these permutations of hybrid and some groups coming in and some groups coming out, or was that more in Norway?
And in Panama, we were completely, everybody was at home, so it was all online. Here, we've all been face-to-face. We've had cohorts and we've had students be on quarantine, but we have not had to run a hybrid model, no.
What I'm hearing for both of you, what really is resonating is this capacity to be very agile and adaptable in very short times. And also, both of you really highlighted the importance of sticking to your vision, which is student learning, and making that kind of the guiding light. And I'm wondering, was that even more challenging to keep going with all these outside pressures and these variables? Like Liz, you had these hybrid ABC and you were only online. I mean, you both really were very clear. Student learning is what we're about, and we really want to stick to our mission. What were some of the forces that were pulling you away from that, and how did you keep, reminding your community, no, this is what we believe in? And Viki, maybe you want to start?
Yes, I think bringing in outside experts was certainly something that helped us. So, as I mentioned, Dr. Franny was absolutely fantastic, and she was a great support. And just people, often when you say something, somebody else says exactly the same thing, but when it's the outside expert coming in, it's not about you trying to save costs or whatever else it might be. So that was incredibly that was really, really important. And I think most schools have had on their website at some stage, school is closed, but the learning continues. And I think one of the things we've had to do in this time is really narrow down what is it that is really important. So some things like outside testing and that kind of thing is sort of gone by the by, because you're focusing on what is true learning and what is transformative learning. And so you take away all the unnecessary things and you focus on that. And I think that's been very beneficial for students too.
Liz?
For me, it comes down to it's the same as always in many ways, is you come down to what is great leadership. And, great leadership is around effective communication, but it's also having a clear moral purpose and that mission and vision of the school at the heart of every decision. So what I found, and obviously coming into a school in the middle of COVID as well, where you're setting, normally when you come, let's say you look at presidents, first 100 days, you set out your stall, and that's basically what you're going to do for the next decade. So as a school leader coming into that, you've had to really balance out your pace of change during a volatile situation anyway. So for me, the very first thing that I did when I came into ISR was to ask the staff, what is great about this organization? What is this organization about? What is the essence of this organization? And what do we need to do better at? And I come back to that over and over and over. And after a year of, pulling the data apart, being operationally driven, where you've just got to keep the school open and you've got lots of different things happening, we come back to what are we really trying to do here? And is the activity that we're now engaging in, is it helping us in that or not? If it isn't, we don't do it anymore. If it is, we continue doing it. And if we want to revise and improve something, then we invest our time and energy on that. And that's what our board have been really good at as well, is not getting stuck here, because we could very easily get stuck in just the day-to-day operational and trying to keep going. But we've got to keep our eye on what we aspire to be and what we aspire for our young people. So, and I think that's the real tension for heads and school leaders at this time, is to maintain pace while still being cognizant of the situation that we're in and the well-being of the communities that we serve.
And the well-being is, I think, something that I'm curious. So both of you, you're school leaders. I'm sure every email you're CC'd on, basically everybody comes to you for the guidance. How did you balance that? And Liz, you have a family, and Viki, I know you have a family too. How did you kind of balance that where, it was having been through it myself and leading being part of the COVID task force team, it felt 24/7 some days and nonstop. And then you talked about well-being, Liz. How did you balance that yourself, just to have that ability just to pause and maybe refresh?
Well, one of the things, I'm actually very disciplined in how I work. I can't be a mum and do this job and all the other things that come with that without being kind to myself. So one of the things I do is I do not read emails on the weekend. It's a stall that I laid out from the very beginning with my team, and we talked about what is hard work and what is making progress in this organisation, and how do we count it? Do we count it by hours? Do we count it by IB results? What matters here? And everyone came down to the same, is the progress of each and every individual learner. So do I want my staff working on a Sunday all the way through and they come in on a Monday exhausted? No, I do not. And so I have to model that as a school leader. And so I'm very disciplined. I give every member of staff has my personal number. And if there's something that needs to be done on the weekend that they need me for, they can come to me personally. But I don't look at emails. I'm very disciplined about working hard when I'm working hard, and not when I'm not. And I think that's meant that I've had the energy to keep going and to really get this pace of change I was talking about earlier, and to maintain my own positivity and access to the community. You could very easily in this job, and I have to be honest though, John, it's no different during this COVID time than it's always been. My first headship, I think, was in 2004. And I've never met a head teacher who says, oh, do you know what? I've got loads of time and, I'm twiddling my thumbs. So I don't think COVID's any different. It's that maybe the volatility in the community might be a little bit different. So how the community experiences, but as a school leader, it's the same. So I would say is knowing your why. That's the gets you out of bed in the morning and with the energy and positivity that your team deserve and your community deserves. And then making sure that you know how to nurture yourself to enable you to be able to nurture other people, which ultimately as leaders, we're only as good as the teams themselves. So I think it's important to model that and to be really vocal about it, because I think there is an expectation with heads and school leaders that somehow you have to be on all of the time. And I've seen it with my own team. They say to me, oh, Liz, I didn't pick up your email. It's in the holidays. I accidentally sent an email. It was on a time thing, so it kind of went, but it went at the wrong time. And I suddenly got an email back from the leadership team. I was like, no. Why are you replying to me? I don't need you to reply. Didn't say urgent. Didn't say reply to me right now. Please don't. If I need you, I'll find you.
Liz, I'm really curious. Like, I think that's a really good productivity hack. Like, not looking at email on the weekend, but I'm curious on a practical level, how do you actually do that? Because I would love to do that. John and me always emailing each other on the weekend. I can't stop replying all the time. Like, I mean, do you not have your email app on the phone? I mean, how do you?
I don't have. I have two separate phones.
Your mental commitment. You just don't look at your phone.
This is my work phone, and I have a separate one for my personal phone. I deliberately have two iPhones so that I can manage that. And you say that my question is. I mean, it's different if you're doing things that is because you're interested in. So, I do a lot of the women ed activity. I do a lot of voluntary work in education. And yes, I do that on the weekends and I do that in the evening. But that for me is the extra bit. That's for the love of the profession, really. But the core work, no, I'm unless it's something really critical. And occasionally, if you have there's a major event coming up or something like that, and I'm just run out of time. No, I'm just disciplined. I'm very, very specific in it. And everyone has a different way of working. And for some people, it might be, Dan, that working on the weekend works for you. But if I do that as a school leader, and then my leadership team replicate it because they think that's my expectation, what you now do in your team is create a culture where it's expected and you're somehow less than if you don't do it. So I've explained to everybody how I work and what works for me, and I work to that ideal. And everybody, staff will say to me, actually, Liz, I need to, I might have, I don't know, there might be some of our staff, doesn't matter whether they're male or female, that have got young children. They say, I'd really like to go at 5 or at 4:30 because I don't want to see my children and put them to bed. And I'll then work an hour between 8 and 9 because that's when I then do my planning for the next day. If that works for somebody, then I respect the fact that they're making informed decisions. And one other thing that I think the COVID period has done is really focused us on agency. We talk about student agency, but actually we need to be talking about teacher agency and all of the data around impact on young people and school improvement. The greater the teacher, the sense of agency from the teacher, the higher the academic attainment and student outcomes. So I trust my teachers. I trust them I know they all work hard. I haven't met a teacher who doesn't work hard. So I really think it's important that as a profession, we start to focus on what matters, which is teaching and learning. It's not how many hours you put in on a Saturday or a Sunday.
It's interesting because we worked with the German-Swiss International School in Hong Kong, and this was a few years ago, so it might have changed. But because the school has some connection to the German government back then, maybe it still does, staff were not allowed to answer email from 4 o'clock on a Friday until 8 o'clock or something on a Monday. You actually, because that was a law for civil servants in Germany, you couldn't reply on the weekend. And so they actually couldn't email on the weekend. Everyone was banned.
And then what you have is teachers. When we think about what makes great teachers, is teachers who bring the joy of their lives and what they do into the classroom. They're the teachers that climb up mountains on the weekend or go off and do interesting things. So and I'm not saying it's not. I don't think people should work hard. I think we work very hard in the profession, but I think we've got to work smart, and we've just got to get away from this idea of long hours and almost this that you're sacrificing yourself somehow is making you better at your job. It doesn't. And what happens is we see attrition from the profession, and we see that. And I mean, John, when we were messaging before around specifically around women, we know that women that hit in their 40s and 50s, particularly in the international sector, that's when they start to drop out of leadership roles. And one of the reasons cited is because they get the pressure point of family, sometimes elderly family, when you're in the international sector, and teenage children. And then you throw in on top of that a high expectation of long working hours, and we lose great people. So I think we've got to put our children first and really focus on that, and then find lots of different ways to be that our staff can be so they can thrive.
Viki, what about your balance and your wellness? Because everybody has a different approach. So Liz really gave us a great hack, no emails during the weekend. How about yourself?
I think during this time, you do think more and more about balance in life, because once COVID hit and we all went online, it was sort of all work and no play. You know, you go from one Zoom meeting to another. And I remember my husband being in the room next door, and I would actually sit there with my phone and I'd WhatsApp him and say, can you bring me a glass of water, or something like that. So and one really had to focus on that. So that's when I really started yoga, the Calm app, and things like that to, excuse me, my lights keep going out. So that was a change and a focus, stand-up paddleboarding and all of that. But Panama became very, very strict, and we had days where men were allowed out and days where women were allowed out, and you were only allowed out for 1 hour a day. And that did not include any exercise. You could go to the supermarket or the chemist, and that was it. So it was very, very strict. But I think one of the things that happened is that we as a leadership team, we were all faced with this incredible problem, and problems were being thrown at us right, left and center. And people stepped up, and we were all doing things we'd never done before. We'd never done online assemblies before. So as an example, and most of our teachers had never functioned in the way before that was now expected of them. We were all going through this, student well-being. We didn't want our kids to be sitting at the screen, but at the same time, we had parents wanting, lessons as they had in their mind's eye a vision of what school was like. So all of this was going on, and I think often people talk about leadership being a lonely profession, and I honestly don't think it is. I actually think that's almost a male construct of leadership. I think leadership is a highly collaborative experience where we really learn from each other and where people step up at the right times. And this happened more in COVID than I've ever seen before. I saw people develop skills and help each other in ways that weren't so common beforehand. And the level of trust went up even more so in our team. We were always a very, very close team. But, and I see that now that I'm in Bergen, where one night we had some COVID cases and we knew we had to put some students into quarantine. Well, I had gone to bed, to be honest. I was exhausted at 9 o'clock, and this happened at 9:30 at night. And the rest of the team just stepped up and did everything exactly the way we all agreed. Learning continues, and this is how we're going to do it. And they wrote all the letters, and all the parents heard about it, and it was absolutely fine. And I don't think that kind of agency had been fostered to that higher degree previously. So I think that's one of the silver linings that we've all experienced from COVID, that level of trust, the closeness, and that people have been given faith to, step up because we're facing problems we haven't faced before.
And that's interesting because, go ahead, Dan.
No, I just like to say, Viki, one thing you said really quickly there, which I think is a great hack, is the Calm app, which I would have thought was really cheesy, but I absolutely love the sleep stories. I use it. I use it all the time. It's how I fall asleep at night. They have a lot of train journey stories. That's actually for someone listening to like a concrete hack. You wouldn't think an app that just has calming mantras and sleep things, but it is. But I found that like a really good app to relax.
Me too.
Yeah. Sorry, John.
Yeah, not at all. And I think, what you're saying, Dan, it's so important that, everybody has a different hack, and they're all, just because the no email on weekends worked for you doesn't mean it has to work for everybody else. I think it's about what makes sense for you and what can you manage and what can you actually follow through on, because it's all great saying, I'm going to do these things, but then if you don't do them, then that's obviously not working for you. You both talk about...
Sorry.
No, Dan,
No, I was agreeing. Sorry.
You both talk about agency, and you talk about agency of students and teachers. And Viki, you have that wonderful anecdote of this leadership team that basically takes care of an important workflow and doesn't bother calling you or emailing you, and because they knew exactly what they had to do and they were being mindful of you needing some rest. Now that you've experienced that, are you constructing your interactions and your team building in a different way because you know of this power that you've both witnessed through COVID and maybe even before, but maybe the combination has amplified that importance? I don't know, Viki, what do you think because you then moved to a new school?
I took a lot of those learnings with me. And I think, building a team and really learning from each, what are our various strengths and having complete faith in that. So we come to agreements in our team and, but that's COVID or no COVID. And once we've decided on that, we all go ahead and we do what we do. And then the next week we come back and say, well, how did that go? And so on. But the trust level is very high. And I think it's a much more efficient way of working as well. I do not need to look over my team's shoulders. They've all been chosen to be where they are because they are fantastic at the job that they do. And I think that way our time is being used efficiently and the school moves forward really well. But COVID possibly made us rely on each other like this. So we tested each other under very stressful situations.
Well, that's interesting. So maybe the trust was there, but through COVID, the test, it actually was a deliverable.
Yes.
Liz, how about your thoughts on this idea of agency and trust in a leadership team?
I think it's difficult to assess what it would have been like otherwise, because, of course, I came into a school that was in the middle of coping with COVID and left a school that was in the middle of coping with COVID. So I think in some ways it's easier because during the COVID period, everything is stripped back. So when you often come into a school as a new head or director, the first thing you have to do is get under the skin of the school itself, is to understand the environment that you're in. And so when you come in during COVID, the school has already made the decisions about what it values and what it continues to do and what it doesn't continue to do. And so I think that's a really interesting time to come in as a head or director because the conversations have already started. So when it comes to agency, I think it's opened the door in a way that if we hadn't had COVID, it would have been different coming into, because everyone is used to the conversation of, well, should we do that or should we not do it? Whereas before I would have come in and it would be like, we've always done it this way, and therefore that is what it is. And it's a whole conversation about change. So kind of you're in an environment that's ripe for change, and you've got a leadership team, if you've inherited one, which I did, who are very dedicated to the school and committed to the school and open and ready for the conversation of why are we doing that and not that. So I find it hard to assess what would it have been like if it wasn't COVID. How would the team have been? How would they have been with a new director coming in? We've got a new campus being built. We've got significant change afoot. But what I have learned is around the use of really practical things like meetings. We've been much more efficient in our use of time, both within our own departments and also with our parents. So even things like we have, normal parent-teacher conferences with students and teachers and parents, three-way communication. And we did them all online last year, and we had the highest turnout that we'd ever had in the entire school's history. And so we're like, wow, this is amazing. This now means not only are we getting one parent, in most cases, we're getting access of two parents calling into these conferences. The parents might not even be in the same place. They could be in different countries. So things like that, I think, give people more time so that they feel they have more control, and also they can make decisions about what works for them. So I suppose the agency question will really come about over time, but I hope we've trusted our profession, trusted our colleagues to make decisions and then to run with it.
So now that you've experienced the last 18 months, and we're still in some permutation of COVID,
Yeah.
what would you say you've stopped doing that you did before and now you're no more doing? Viki, anything that you can, in the context of your leadership? And I'm putting you guys on the spot.
So I always find that exercise of what do you stop doing? I was talking earlier about trust and just letting people run with things. And I think one simply has to, because we've all had so many additional things we've had to deal with, that, you know, to really be very precise and to just say, okay, you run with this and just expect it's going to be done. And, you know, experience has told us it's working.
Nice. Liz?
It's really difficult because actually, what have I stopped doing? Well, not a huge amount actually. I've carried on doing, cramming more and more in. But actually, that's an interesting point, because one of the things I believe in is saying yes. And when we talk about career paths and how do you progress if you're looking to develop into leadership, what I say is take every opportunity. So I think what I've learned during this time is I've been more discerning. And I've said no to something. So I've started to look at the time that I have and think, what can I realistically do? And I don't know if this is COVID related or just a time of my life where I've said yes too many times, maybe, is to start to pass things on to other people. So whether it's, I was on the Mathematical Association for 10 years on the primary group, and I thought, actually, I've given what I can to this group. I now want to focus my energy on these, and it's time for somebody else to take the baton. So I think this time of COVID has enabled a period of reflection, maybe, personally, and I've learned that I don't have to keep doing everything.
Yeah.
And if I can just add, I think sometimes, you don't say anymore, it's not possible. You say, how is it possible? I think that's one of the things. It's been a shift in thinking. And I think an emphasis on having things like laughter, as part of, how important that is. When I said before, it's all work and it's no play, it is so important that we laugh together, that we build community together, and that we have a joyful culture. And I think we've all become very, very cognizant of that. And some little time savers, instead of writing long emails, sending somebody a quick video. I didn't used to do that before, but now you do it, and I know technology has moved on, but it's just a more efficient way of communicating in some cases. So it's little hacks like that.
I love the video one.
Yeah, Loom is a great tool for that. I use that all the time.
So you would just so instead of sending an email, you quickly get on your laptop and do a quick video and just send them the video.
Yeah, often over WhatsApp, which sounds terribly informal, but it's just an efficient way of doing it. Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I think that's, so often for leaders, those little things can make such a big difference. The idea, I know some principals no more have faculty meetings. They actually screencast their faculty meeting, and now they have learning meetings. So they're saying all the nuts and bolts and information. Guess what? You watch the video. Now we're in a room and we're going to talk about learning. Because, that PowerPoint that goes through professional development or whatever it might be, grade 12's lunch or what, and suddenly that's a way. Why would you do that in a room with 100 people when you could have them watch the video when they want? And if they don't watch it, that's their problem. Then they don't know. But when you're in the room, you're really talking about the essence, which is student learning. So I love both that you're highlighting some of those hacks.
And I think with both Liz and me being new, I think, video is a great way of parents getting to know you, just a 30-second snip of something that's happening. They weren't allowed to come into the building, so let's bring it to them. And that's been very successful.
So that sounds like something you started doing, Viki, is this idea of leveraging video for parents and also in messaging. Liz, what about yourself? What maybe did you start doing that you didn't do before?
So you probably know I've got a passion for professional learning and development. And no, it shouldn't be slides. You're absolutely right, John. We're not going to sit through 100 slides. But I've been trying to think really hard about how, again, do we maintain pace for school improvement during this period, because we still are in schools. Many of us, are wanting to develop, wanting to improve, wanting to even be even better for our students. And so one of the things that we've done is really targeted professional learning and development on individual goal setting and taking away performance management. We've scrapped that. And we're focusing on how do we empower the individual to develop what they know they need to develop, because they are the professional in their field. And one of the things I've done is we have the usual inset days, like many of us. And so I've given over the inset day. So I've just said, I know we're right, because they're recording their professional learning goals. We're agreeing them, we're talking about them, is I give them the time. I say, right, there's 6 hours there that you would normally be in the school for professional learning and development. I don't mind how you use it during the year. You can do it at any time you like. You can do it on Christmas Day if you really want to. You do not have to be in school on this inset day at this time, because learning doesn't happen like that. Professional learning is about your conversations on a Sunday over Twitter. Or it might be meeting somebody for a coffee. It might be visiting another school. So I've given over. I've kind of put my money where my mouth is, if you like, and said, I trust you. I trust you to do it. You'll put your reflections during the year, and you use that time for your own learning. So that's a little thing that we've done. And what I've seen, I did it last year as a trial to see what would happen. And then people said to me, you're crazy. Yes, this time is so precious. You've got to have people in. And I agree with you, John, that you have to, when you have people in, it's for meaningful conversation, but not all meaningful conversations have to happen in one place or at a specified time or with designated people. If I'm the head of science or I'm a physics teacher, am I going to develop in an inset in a school where we only have one physics teacher? Maybe, maybe not. So I think being really targeted about what you do and finding opportunities to reach inwards, but also reach outwards, because we're not going to the conferences, we're not doing the IB workshops, we're not having that face-to-face contact, which actually is really important for connection. So I've been trying to find different ways to get the community involved, when I think digitally, the school that I'm in has not really been focused on doing that. They haven't done that naturally. They've relied on the kind of traditional methods of connecting. So we're trying to do some smart stuff around that, but I'll let you know how it goes.
Excellent. Yeah. And I think that nimbleness and suppleness is, Dan, I'm curious what you think about this model of the inset and, giving people more autonomy, because you're working with a lot of schools around the world. What have you noticed? Does this kind of make sense from what you're seeing?
I think that's quite forward thinking. I haven't really seen that at other schools where you've given, normally an inset day is you come in and you're going to learn about, whatever. I think that's a really interesting thing. I mean, different people, different teachers and different staff like to do different things with their PDs. Some might want to do a master's degree and devote a few hours a month. Some might want to just do a few specific IT courses. Some might want to do something completely different, So I think it's good to be very flexible from a school director point of view, in terms of letting people do the sort of training and things that's what interests them,
Yeah, I think that go ahead, please. Yeah.
I was going to say, Joe, it's a really talking about agency. This is absolutely about agency. It's not a free for all, by the way. It's not just go and have a nice time by the beach. Although you could do it by the beach if you wanted to. But there is accountability around it. So we agree. I mean, we did when we use our inset days or inset times, not days, because we actually don't do days anymore. If we've got an inset day, we put it into chunks. So at the beginning of the year, we gave 50% of the time to lesson preparation and preparing for students, and we gave 50% of the time to learning and development. And one of those sessions was around professional goal setting. How do you set impactful professional goals? And so we talked about that for an hour, we practiced it, and then teachers went away and did it. And their goals are now what is leading their personal study and development time. So there's a structure within it, but it's held and owned by the individual. And that's where our true agency comes in. And I think as school leaders, we can, particularly in domestic systems, can be under pressure to conform to particular ways of communicating and developing the profession. And I think this COVID period, if anything, it's given us more freedom.
Wonderful. So you both now are new schools and you've started a new school year. Are there any things that you are surprised by what you might have done that you were like, oh, never thought I was going to do that? I'm just curious, as you know, because you've both shared so many rich learnings and observations, and how you've engaged with this very complex situation over, and both of you in 2 different countries. That's incredible. You were in one country both, and then you moved in the middle of COVID to another country. That's in itself quite complex. What maybe nowadays you're thinking, wow, I've begun doing something and I never thought I would do that. And not in the sense like you're surprised, but more like I'm doing that because it makes more sense. And this experience has allowed me to build that understanding, which maybe I didn't have before. And I'll open it to either Liz and Viki to start. My questions are stumping you. I'm not really good at
You're questions today, John. You're on fire.
Yeah, I think, you know, I'm a pretty sort of black and white thinker, and very organized, and I like to know where we're going and that kind of thing. And COVID has taken that away from us. And I think where I used to be incredibly anxious about, you know, and now suddenly we're going to have a large portion of the school not here or whatever. And I was anxious because people didn't, you know, I was worried people didn't have the skills or what parents would think and that kind of thing. But now we're kind of in a routine, and, you know, you've got that sort of sword of Damocles hanging over your head all the time, but it has ceased to matter as much as it did. So now, you know, we've got a new routine of how we're going to do that. And it's been interesting also to see how students have really adapted to that. You know, to them, this is, I hate the term the new normal, but, you know, they've just learned to live with where we are right now. And, you know, we had UN Day last year, and it came from then that they just said, okay, we can't all sit together the way we used to. So they created this fantastic video, and they got students filming each other, and they put it all together. And we had an assembly where we all ended up celebrating in our own classrooms. But it's just really this sort of whole flexibility, agility, and ceasing to worry that things may not be perfect and certainly aren't the way they used to be. It's okay now. And I think, you know, we've had a lot of practice at this now. And that's a good feeling, really, to know that I work with a group of people who can do a 180-degree turn at the drop of a hat. And that's pretty cool. I didn't think it was going to happen.
Yeah, that's that. And especially if you're, as you described, you're a person that likes more black and white. That's huge that you're more comfortable pivoting very quickly with a little unknown. That's wonderful. Liz?
I think it's a really hard question because I still feel like we're in it.
We are.
I don't know if we're going to come out the other side. I don't know if there is another side. It'd be interesting to reflect back. One of the things that probably surprises me and shouldn't surprise me is actually schools are still schools. Students are still students, and we still deal with, as teachers and school leaders, the extraordinary things. So, you know, just thinking of my day last week, you know, I went from dealing with mammoths, you know, the little like beaver things trying to eat our wires and climbing underneath the building to try and fix it, through to some kind of deep pedagogical preparation for the board meeting. And then at another point, I was 3,000 meters up a mountain doing a photo shoot for our new website with a load of students with their backpacks on. And I just thought, wow, this is why I became a teacher in the first place. And the same stuff still matters. We might get there in a slightly different way, which is where we started at the beginning of this conversation. But I suppose in the extraordinary experience that we've all been through, we've all in the international community experienced trauma during this time, that actually our children need the routine. They need the learning environments, whether that's virtual or face-to-face, that we offer. And what we can bring to the community is stability, even in volatility. So I think I don't know if it's a surprise to me, but when I reflect back, I think that we are, at times, whilst we may not feel well equipped sometimes when we're thinking about how do we do this, is this right or is that right? You know, what are we doing with live videos and child protection we were talking about earlier? You know, does anyone really know what the right answer is there? Actually, if we're putting children first, then we're doing what we've always done.
Wonderful. So I would just, as we wrap up here, I'm just wondering if you have any, you know, we have a lot of, our audience are international educators and leaders and middle level leaders, any kind of just little, as you look at the year ahead, what are some of the things that your mantra, what are you saying? Okay, this is what we have to look forward to, or based on this experience. And you both have done such a rich job in expressing those learnings. What are some things, maybe, kind of a positive note that you would like to send out to people about what, as you said, Liz, it's not yet over, and we don't know when it's over, and will it ever be over? That's for the pundits to decide. But just each, as school leaders, what are some just little words of wisdom that you'd like to leave the audience with?
Sorry, I'll go first.
Yeah.
I think what I would say is how important it is to look outwards as well as inwards. So how you build your professional network, whether it's online through Twitter, whether it's through podcasts, is to make sure that you don't get stuck. Because it's very easy during this time to become insular and inward looking. And as an international community, the real strength that we have is each other. So I think as school leaders, I mean, Viki was saying earlier about, you're not actually alone, and you really aren't. But forge your own networks. And if you're not able to get that in the usual ways, think of creative ways, just as you do for your students and how much time and energy you put into them, put that into you too, so that you can be the very best that you can be.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's a great strategy. Viki.
Yes, no, you talked about mantra just before, and I think we do rise by lifting others, and we need to connect. And I think that's been more important than ever before. People have felt very lonely, especially in the international community, people who haven't been able to see, in my own case, my daughter for 2 years. My mother is in New Zealand, and all of our families are going through that at the moment. And I think that, really consciously connecting, laughing together, and being there for each other in maybe other ways than we have done before is now more important than ever.
Thank you. Well, Liz and Viki, thank you so much for coming and joining us. In the show notes, we have the school's websites and their Twitter. So make sure to connect with Liz and Viki as you feel appropriate, and definitely follow them. And you can kind of keep tabs on their professional journey through their Twitter and their work that they're doing in their respective schools. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John.
Thank
you, Dan.
you.
And thank you, Liz.
Thank you.